We have more for your ears only. I'm David Alpern.
I'm Catherine Herzog with this news quote. Germany's strength is not infinite. That was German Chancellor Angela Merkel, resisting pressure to support more financial aid in the face of the Eurozone crisis. But the head of the European Central Bank hinted that there could be more assistance as Greeks headed into an election that could take them off the euro rather than suffer demands for more austerity. Now this.
Ça se termine sur une double faute. Et comme on l'a souvent vu ici, Rafael Nadal est à genoux sur la terre. Il a dit non au grand chelem de Novak Djokovic. Et il est le joueur qui a remporté le plus de fois Roland Garros. Il fait mieux que Björn Borg à 26 ans.
Tennis fans thought they saw history being made last weekend as Novak Djokovic of Serbia won game after game from Spain's Rafael Nadal at the rain-delayed French Open. When the pair returned to the court next day, however, Nadal pumped up the pressure and Djokovic lost the title on a sad double fault. It was a battle of individual titans, of course, but colored too by some of the same elements of national pride, international sportsmanship, and mind-boggling high stakes that mark so much of the world's major sports competition.
Clearly, there's an appetite for such competition, but how does it shape the larger international dynamic? From the violence of soccer riots to the hugs and handshakes of opponents once the prize is won, to the huge investments many countries make in teams and venues. With the London Olympics fast approaching, the summer issue of the World Policy Journal focuses on these and related issues in the games people play. And to discuss them for your ears only, we're joined again by the World Policy Journal editor, David Adelman. Just returned from a conference in Italy on the real-world game of Monopoly, now underway in the Eurozone. Welcome back to our program.
Thanks for having me, Catherine.
So was there a consensus among your contributors on whether these games we play bring us together over class, ethnic, and national boundaries, or foster more division and winning is the only thing corruption, drugs, bribes?
Well, certainly there is a common language of sports, a common culture, if you will, across societies and boundaries. But that said, sports is also big business. So we found inevitably that corruption and a bitter competition for the spoils that go beyond simply the gold, silver, or bronze of medals. And incidentally, all too often impoverished nations aren't up to the challenges of competing on an international level.
Some of the pieces in your package talk about sports helping to develop national identity, consciousness, confidence. But at the Olympic level, you report the investment of host nations is very rarely repaid by increased attention, tourism, investment.
Well, that's true, David. All too often, the legacy of major international competition, especially the Olympics, but other world sports also, the World Cup, for instance, is a legacy of decades of debt, lavish facilities that languish and decay, in short, waste and burdens that linger long after the cheering ever stops.
You have a fascinating piece about surfing for peace by Israelis and Palestinians?
Yes, it is a fascinating effort to bring together peace among these two feuding peoples by the sort of one-on-one interaction of surfing as a sport and those who teach it to young men and women of both societies. And this has worked very well, very effectively in bringing these two societies together, or at least small numbers of people in those two societies.
Given what you've said about the investment that is often not repaid in sports, China, you report, is using construction of stadiums in developing countries around the world to support its diplomacy and foreign policy goals. Does history suggest that might backfire if these things don't really pay off?
Well, it could very well backfire. They're also using it to, they're discovering that building sports facilities, these are huge stadiums like the ones they built for their own Olympics, in developing nations can also be paid for both in natural resources like oil and minerals, as well as the diplomatic resources, the diplomatic recognition of the Chinese state that you already talked about. Most of these facilities are not very much needed by these countries, but they get talked into them by the Chinese, who are very good salesmen. In fact, in an earlier issue of Policy Journal, we discovered that China was doing the same thing with similarly useless dams across the third world, damming up rivers that had no business being dammed up, but in order to simply win China construction contracts.
Well, we don't always think of chess as a sport, but your issue includes an interview with Russian Grandmaster Garry Kasparov, who stresses that game's value and education, perhaps more than ever in the age of the internet and artificial intelligence.
Well, that's true. Kasparov sees chess as a way of sort of tying people even more closely together across languages, across cultures, and that sort of thing.
He also sees political and psychological reasons for the decline of chess in Vladimir Putin's Russia.
Oh, yes, indeed. Chess in Putin's Russia is no longer a necessity, a means of cementing the power of the state or bringing prestige to the government or to the state. Now it has oil and a whole new ruling elite to solve those problems.
But you say that Putin is also suspicious of almost anything intellectual.
Well, he is. He also doubts that Putin will ever last out his 6-year term of office. That's one of the really central points that he was making, that he has all kinds of suspicions, but forces of modernization and democratization, he'd likely be leading those forces himself, and sooner rather than later they may force him to step down, so any of those intellectual issues may become moot.
Well, since talk of games has gotten us into the world of serious politics, let's talk about the prospects for European economic stability and what you learned at a conference about it in Italy on the eve of this weekend's Greek elections. Is there a will and a way to keep Greece in the Eurozone or deal effectively with its departure?
Well, there's certainly a will to keep Greece in the Eurozone, Catherine. Whether there's a way is very much another question. We heard at this conference of Italians and Americans that both from the Italian Prime Minister Mario Monti and the governor of Italy's central bank, and both said that growth is absolutely essential to hold Europe and the euro together. So Ignazio Visco of the central bank told us he'd hold their prime rate at 1% as long as necessary to assure growth in his country. But this is no longer just an economic question. That's what quite clearly happened over the last week. It's a political one, and on Sunday, Greece's voters are giving an answer, hopefully which way they want to go, and then we'll have to see how the rest of Europe reacts.
You also see likely political gamesmanship in Saudi Arabia after the death of the crown prince there.
Yes, there's no question about that. You know, the crown prince was the minister of the interior, Naif. He was a very conservative force in that country. Prince Salman, who's the next in line, they were both, by the way, King Abdullah's brothers. Prince Salman is now the Minister of Defense. He's likely to be second in line. He's seen as potentially more moderate, and this could give new encouragement to powerful democratic forces to emerge from the shadows cast by the Mutawa, that's the religious police, and the Interior Ministry that Naif oversaw, and that he used those items. He was known, by the way, as the Dark Prince, and he used those items, those forces to suppress dissent all over the country. This could give dissenters and democratization a new hope.
David Adelman is editor of the World Policy Journal at the World Policy Institute. Its new summer 2012 issue features Games People Play at worldpolicy.org.
Quote from the news, "I do everything I do to pay tribute to my great-grandfather." That was Nick Wallenda of the famed Flying Wallenda's Aerolist family before becoming the first person to walk a cable directly over Niagara Falls, 1,800 feet from the U.S. to Canada in less than half an hour. His great-great-grandfather Carl died in 1978 after falling from a wire in Puerto Rico.
Next, Songs for a Summer Night, for your ears only.